ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. We are continuing in our study of Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, and we saw in the previous chapter some important additions to the Ajrumiyya itself in the chapter on the of the na'at, right? Of the different types of na'at, and there are some core concepts, and this is where the more one spends time on a text on one's own, right? And of course, not to just redo things, but for example, there are core concepts, right? That one of the startingly simple concepts that in Bab al-Na'at is that what does the Na'at convey with respect to the nakira and with respect to the ma'rifah, right? The na'at in the nakira, what does it express? Takhsis, right? And in the ma'rifah, tawdih, right? Like جاء زيد العالم, as opposed to Zayd, some other Zayd, right? And there are other usages for it as well, al-madh, al-dham, etc., that we saw, and we discussed, these being considered metaphorical usages, right? And this is not strictly speaking grammar, right? These are to the usage of Dr. Fadil al-Samarra'i. He has a work called Ma'ani al-Nahu. These are the meanings brought out through the grammar. Okay. Today we're looking bi'idhnillahi ta'ala at Babul Atf, right? And here we have the addition of Atful Bayan. Right? So the Atful Bayan is a tabi', right? So it falls under the tawabi'. It has a resemblance to the na'at, right? In that it comes to make tawdih or takhsis, right? But there are several things that differentiate it, right? What are they? Number one, so now the na'at generally happens, the what's called, so the atf, right? What's called atf nasaq happens through a harf, right? Through a harf. The atf bayan is considered atf for reasons that we will see. However, it resembles the na'at in that there's nothing separating between, there isn't this harf separating between it and the and what it is a tabi' of. But there's a few other distinctions, right? One is that the atf bayan is there's differences. One is that it is jamid, غير مؤول, right? 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 That's the critical difference, right? And that has consequences. It corresponds to the matbu' in 4 of 14 things, right? In its i'rab, it's, which is 3. In its tadhkir and tankir, being male or female. It's in 4 of 10, right? In one of the 3 potential states of i'rab, one of 2 potential states of tadhkir and tankir, one of 2 states of ta'rif or tankir, and in its case, either ifrad, tathniya, or jama'. And the atf bayan, so it has a resemblance to not, it also has a resemblance to the badal, which is that the atf bayan can be you can make i'rab of it as a badal. And we will see that why is there a distinction between considering it a badal, or considering something atf bayan versus it being badal. And that goes back to the meaning, right? The distinction. So there's a point of resemblance between na'at and atf bayan, insofar as it's describing the thing. And in that sense, it also either does takhsis or tawdih. But his key distinction is that it's jamid and not mu'awwal, or it's not mushtaq or mu'awwal bil mushtaq. Then the other question would arise, why isn't it just a badal? Which is coming in a bit. So there's points of distinction between the atf bayan and the badal. And we'll look at that. But just to put that's sort of the overview of atf bayan. The regular atf, right? Which is atf, through the huruf. There's 10 huruf that are mentioned, right? And he categorizes them. And this is where it would be important to make a good breakdown of these, because it really does bring out important meanings. So قال صاحب المتممة رحمه الله تعالى والعطف نوعان عطف بيان, right, وعطف نسق. And عطف البيان has the meaning of عطف, but بغير حرف, right? Now عطف is an amazing word, right? The Arabic language, right? And Ibn Hisham, for example, famously in the Mughni, makes tahqiq that, also controversial tahqiq, it has theological implications too. That rahmah, the core meaning of rahmah is al-atf. So atf as an idea of, atf has a sense of dhamm, of bringing something close, care, concern, but it has an idea of dhamm, of bringing something back. But it's an amazing word, right? The poets use it a lot. عطفا يا جيرة الحرم, right? Right? And that's why this Faqih, he gave a linguistic definition of atf, What does he say? Right? It's to return to something after leaving it. Right? So either you left it or it left you. Right? So that's the so it's the atf. The atf is to bringing two things together, but they belong together, right? Right. So and if you look at, that's where it's one of the words because there's a relationship between it and mercy, right? So you do well if you looked in Mu'jam Maqayis al-Lugha, etc. Right? Feelings are also called, in modern Arabic especially, called awatif. Emotions are, or the atifa is, that's the capacity. That's where the capacity of caring and concern is. So he says, فعطف البيان هو التابع المشبه للنعت في توضيح متبوعه إن كان معرفة. Right? And you give an example. وتخصيصه إن كان نكرة. Right? Sometimes when definitions are given in this way, so the definition got scattered, we have to sort of bring the definition together, right? So عطف البيان هو التابع, right? هو التابع المشبه للنعت. It's a تابع, right? That's like the category, right? That resembles the na'at, right? Insofar as it clarifies the matbu', if it's definite, right? But there's a distinction made, and this is quite useful. Does al-Fakihi mention this? Right? If you, Al-Ahdal says that there's a distinction of how the tawdih, how the clarification happens in the na'at versus the atf bayan. He says, لكن النعت يوضح متبوعه بحسب معنى فيه. Right? The na'at, right, which is also sifa, right? Na'at or sifa, يوضح متبوعه بحسب معنى فيه, with respect to a meaning it possesses. Like the idea of an attribute, right? وعطف البيان يوضح متبوعه بحسب الذات. And عطف البيان clarifies or specifies what it follows in terms of the thing itself. So which is why, is this in Fakihi? Right? So Al-Ahdal says, وبهذا يعلم أن النعت يدل على معنى في متبوعه. The na'at points to a meaning in the man'ut, right? In what it follows. كالمدح, such as praise, أو الذم, أو غير ذلك, and other than that. وعطف البيان لا يدل على معنى في متبوعه. عطف البيان does not indicate a meaning in the matbu', it indicates the matbu' itself. right? And one of the most common types of atf bayan, of course, it happens in names, right? أقسم بالله أبو حفص عمر, right? أقسم بالله أبو حفص عمر, right? 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 So what's the and it's referring to Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, right? Right? It was said by right. And what is the shahid? Okay, so is Umaru is Atban, right? Now, of course, Abu Hafs is kunya, Sayyidina and became common as a kunya of others after him, because his daughter's name is Hafsa, وقيل غير ذلك, why? Called Abu Hafs, right? Right? And so أقسم, of course, فعل ماضي بالله, جار ومجرور. The ba is حرف قسم وجر, right? لفظ الجلالة مقسم به في محل جر بالكسر, right? Abu is the fa'il of أقسم وعلامة وهو مرفوع, right? because it's of the Asma al-Khamsa, Abu, and Hafsin, Majroor, Umar is, what is Umar? It's Atf Bayan, right? Now Umar, it's a badal, right? It's a Umar, okay, not a badal, right? It's a tabi', number one, right? Why? Because we know it follows why is it marfu'? Because Abu Hafs, Abu and Abu Hafs is marfu', so it's a tabi'. It resembles the na'at insofar as يوضح متبوعه, right? Which Abu Hafs? We mean Umar, because there could be another Abu Hafs called Ghazanfar, right? So it makes tawdih. But what's the distinction? The na'at brings out a meaning in the thing. أقسم بالله زيد العالم. Alim brings out a meaning in Zayd. Here, the عطف بيان يوضح نفس المتبوع, right? So one of the most common things, it comes in names. Right? An example from the Quran that is جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام, right? Right? And there's ikhtilaf on that being atf bayan though. Right? 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 وتخصيصه إن كان نكرة وتخصيصه إن كان نكرة هذا خاتم حديد. Right? بالرفع يعني بالرفع يعني هذا خاتم حديد. You can say خاتم حديد and we've taken that, correct? خاتم حديد. When did it come up? Yeah, right. It's إضافة تقد. Because the إضافة is the general meanings of it is what? There's two. Everyone agree? Right, and then there's fee, and there's controversy about fee, right? Okay. هذا خاتم حديد, but if you say خاتم حديد with رفع, right? This is عطف بيان of خاتم. This عطف بيان is used to make تخصيص, because the khatam could be of anything. So you make تخصيص of it. You can also put it in nasb as well, of it being tamyiz, right? You can make إضافة tamyiz or عطف بيان, and probably in that order, right? خاتم حديد, خاتم حديدا, خاتم حديد. But don't do this, right? Unless you've seen that. So this is the similarity. تخصيص, توضيح or تخصيص. ويفارق النعت في كونه جامدا, right? غير مؤول يعني مشتق. والنعت مشتق أو مؤول بمشتق. We took, what does jamid mean, folks?
That it's not derived from anything and nothing from it.
What does that mean?
As the masdar, like words coming from the masdar, from the root, jamid is a word that nothing is made from those letters.
That's not quite it. Okay? Because Umar, but you can also say Amir, Imara, Ammar, Umair, Amr. They're all from the same root as Umar. So you're in the right neighborhood, you're just knocking on the wrong door. So you're close. See Hamza?
It's a word that is not derived from a Muslim.
Okay. What language are we studying, folks?
It's غير مشتق من المصدر.
Sorry?
اسم غير مشتق من المصدر.
Is that like from the Ta'rifat al-Khaniyya or?
Yes, full.
No, that's not. No, it's good. You guys are in the right neighborhood, right? Now there's an old school way of finding directions where you just go to the neighborhood and ask somebody there, which house is it? Right? Right? But that's not, right? But you know, let's get the definitions tight, right? So I'm going to ask you guys next class, what is the jamid? So it's not mushtaq, but it's also not mu'awwal bil mushtaq. In the case of the, unlike the, فيفارق عطف البيان النعت ويفارق النعت في كون عطف البيان جامدا غير مؤول بمشتق والنعت مشتق يعني جاءني زيد الفاضل for example أو مؤول بمشتق مررت بزيد القرشي right for example is مؤول okay أي المنسوب إلى قريش okay ويوافق متبوعه في 4 right في واحد من أوجه الإعراب 3 يعني غير الجزم وفي واحد من التذكير والتأنيث وفي واحد من التعريف والتنكير وفي واحد من الإفراد والتثنية والجمع right now one of the things, this is where it's a good question. It's thinking people's questions, folks, and that makes me happy. You guys asked the question about Abu Saud. Sometimes there's a book that's very rich, but it's like when you buy a cake, or let's say you got a pot of nahari. Doesn't mean you eat all of it, right? And if you want to put some on your plate, you got a big pot of nahari, you got a small plate. You're only allowed to have 1 serving. Would you only put the chunks of meat on your plate? No, because to enjoy the dish, you need to put some meat and some sauce. And also there's other people have rights, right? So similarly, like in a really rich book, you have to be selective. That what will I take and what will I leave? Right? And the key thing is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand the text. What explains the text? Definitions really help. Clarifications of the text itself really help. Right? So those are things to look at, right? What clarifies the text? What gives definitions? What clarifies the examples? Now, other detail. Who exactly said the poem? Does it really matter right now? So now I have to say, okay, they differed. Was it said by some person I don't know anyways, like Aqsama billahi Abu Hafs Umar, right? Some person I don't know, named Ibn Aish, said that it was said by another person I don't know, called Ru'ba. Okay, now, I do know who Ibn Aish is, but let's say you don't know who, any of you know who Ibn Aish is? Okay, someone I don't know said it was someone else I don't know. And it couldn't be him because he was not of the tabi'een. Now you read all of that, you're like, why am I reading this? Well, you shouldn't be reading it, because all we really need to check, first thing you say, okay, do I understand all the lines? Do I understand Aqsama billahi Abu Hafs Umar? Is there any word there that I don't understand? So I skip over who said it. I skip over the lugha. If I understand the words clearly, I understood them. Maybe I glance over it, see, is there something of significance? No. Right? The i'rab. Okay, I'd like to look at the i'rab. Right? وَالْمَعْنَى مِنَ الْقِصَّةِ. Sometimes you say, okay, معنى القصة, I'm not interested in the qissa right now, right? But sometimes you just put an annotation, معنى القصة, but you skip it. Now later, let's say you've prepared the whole thing and you're intrigued by this line of poetry. Why did Sayyidina Umar swear by Allah. What did he swear about? Right? Sometimes like that's intriguing, right? So you read it. But that's like nafl, right? So here as well, because they'll go into certain ishkal that, okay, there's some line of poetry where something else came up. Is it explaining the text? No, don't need to worry about it, right? ويصح في عطف البيان أن يعرب بدل كل في الغالب. In most cases you could make the عطف بيان بدل كل من كل, right? Because there's different types of بدل, as we'll see, right? Right? And there's some argument, and we'll see it, that are there shurut in atf bayan, right? That does the atf bayan have to be awdah from the matbu', right? 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 And if you'd like to read about that, you can see it in al-Ahdal. Right? And what al-Faq, I don't know if Faqih goes into that. You do well. Now, one of the things you see with the Mutammima, that the Mutammima is really good for, but it's a limitation, because the Mutammima adds a whole slew of details, but he'll give you an example here, an example there, but please do some examples of Atf al-Bayan, right? Like 10, 15, 20, to make it clear. That's where what's it called? The Nahw al-Wadifi, for example, is very useful. I don't know if Shaykh Ali has it in his work, right? So that's Atf al-Bayan. It says, أما عطف النسق, right? النسق is ما جاء على نظام واحد, is that which comes in a similar way. Say هذا على نسق هذا, this is like this. أي على نظمه, it's in the same order, right? And interestingly, this is an expression, Atf al-Nasaq, that was from the Kufiyin. Sibawayh referred to it as this, the huruf al-Atf, as he called it Babu al-Sharika, right, of partnership, because these huruf they share some meaning. But this is one of the places where the Kufan expression generally predominated. So Al-Faki says, هو المتداول. That's the widespread use. But you'll see in certain books, especially earlier books, the expression, right? So he says, وَأَمَّا عَطْفُ النَّسَقِ فهو التابع الذي يتوسط بينه وبين متبوعه حرف من هذه الحروف العشرة. Right? Right? And he mentions هذه الحروف العشرة because he lists them to exclude other than them. Right? And part of the reason being there are حروف العطف that are مختلف فيها. And you don't need to worry about them. But they're there. Al-Ahdal mentions them, for example. Right? Things like that, you have to have something to say, حروف العطف المختلف فيها. He mentions that. And then just skip the section. Because if you put too much in your head, you'll have confusion. وهي الواو والفاء وثم وحتى وأم وأو وإما وبل ولا ولكن. Right? And لكن, there's خلاف about لكن. Right? Right? So these are 10, and the lakin is put at the end, and maybe the wisdom is to indicate the difference. Right? So he says, فَالسَّبْعَةُ الْأُوَلِ, right? Which is الواو والفاء وثم وحتى وأم وأو وإما. Right? تقتضي التشريك في الإعراب والمعنى. Right? Right? The first 7 indicate التشريك أي التشريك بين التابع المتبوع في الإعراب, that's straightforward, والمعنى. Now, but it doesn't mean that they share the same meaning. They share in the meaning of what they... So we'll see it in the examples. What's meant by tashriq fil ma'na, right? We look at... Because if you say, for example, if you say, جاء زيد والكلب, where's the tashriq?
They're coming.
Good. Fil maji'. Let's try. You know, we might institute a speak in Arabic policy, right? Somebody, by the way, has to follow up with Sheikh Mu'min, right? And were both of you in that message?
Yes.
Okay. Please follow up, guys. The tashriq fil ma'na does not mean that Zayd and Kalb share a meaning. Right? That's why Sayyidah Aisha's disagreement, شَبَّهْتُمُونَ بِالْكِلَابِ is مدفوع على جلالة قدرها. Rather, the tashriq is in, you know, for example, in the maji', for example, right? جاء زيد وجاء الكلب. So they both share in that, right? Whether as a fa'il or رأيت زيدا وعمرا, right? One is maf'ul in the maf'uliyya, right? That رأيت زيدا وعمرا. So Zayd and Amr share in having been seen, etc. It's good to be clear about that, right? فإن عطفت فإن عطفت بها على مرفوع رفعت أو على منصوب نصبت أو على مخفوض خفضت أو على مجزوم جزمت. Right. And there's some nice fawaid in al-ahdal here. Just, it's good to make a note that there atf is of different types, and he mentions 3. But skip them, but just know. Nahu, right? صدق الله ورسوله. And do i'rab of these, even if it seems obvious. ومن يطع الله ورسوله آمنوا بالله ورسوله. ونحو وإن تؤمنوا وتتقوا يؤتكم أجوركم ولا يسألكم أموالكم. Correct? So this is the basic thing. Now the next section, please, right? He gives a primary meaning for these huruf. And there's not many. The huruf are extremely rich in meanings. And these are the huruf in general, because they جاء لمعنى. They are the mafatih لربط المعاني وإبرازها. Right? These huruf are the keys to bringing meanings together and manifest meanings and indicate meanings, right? So please make a chart separate from your notes, make a chart of these, and some of them have many different meanings, right? So we're going to look at those bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then move on to tawqeed. But we're really on the verge of finishing the text, folks. So please, and tawqeed is very straightforward, inshallah. So let's try to prepare all of tawqeed, and we'll endeavor to, right? Right, tawqeed, and then badal has a little bit of detail, right? But then you have al-asma al-amila, amal al-fi'l, right? So there's not that, and there's a couple of chapters at the end that need bab al-tanazu', al-ta'ajjub, al-adad. He added a couple of chapters. So we have basically 2 weeks. We aim to finish the text, inshallah. So do map out your next 2 weeks to finish the text, and get your review going. And we're going to be reading the matn of Qawa'id al-i'rab, relying on Shaykh Khalid al-Azhari. We're not going to read Shaykh Khalid al-Azhari, but we're going to use, refer to it. Khansab found a seemingly decent edition. Dar al-Fayhat tends to have reasonable editions. But it varies. It's just one of those things. That editor is he's a professional editor. I was on the verge of studying Shafi'i fiqh with him. I didn't. Partly because I just remain Shafi'i. But I wouldn't get too lost because the Qaida al-Arab was taught a lot, so there are many hawashi on it. It's not, don't get too lost in it. There is a sharh of Shaykh Zada on the Qaida al-Arab. It's beautiful. There's a magnificent sharh of al-Kafiyaji. There are some hawashi on Qaida al-Arab. They're useful to have insofar as they're useful references, because the Qa'id of I'rab as a concept is important. So so just I wouldn't stress about getting to. But can you please put that in the fridge?
Faraz, earlier in the class you mentioned